Even though Halloween is over, I will literally find any excuse to dress up, even if that means making weird video ideas of books that I think that the Wicked characters would like. I recently made a video on books I think Patrick Bateman would like in light of Halloween, and I just thought, you know what, with Wicked coming out, it might be fun to do this as well. So I'm going to be going through 5 different Wicked characters and giving you recommendations on books that I think that they would like, and hopefully you would too. If you're new to the channel, hello, welcome, I'm Katerina. I don't usually dress up like a witch, but I do make videos about books, and if that's something you're into, why don't you consider subscribing? So at the time I'm recording this, Wicked actually hasn't come out yet, so I'm basing these picks based on the musical version, which I saw 3 years ago, and it was absolutely amazing. I would recommend you to go. I also read the book this month, which, oh my god, nobody told me how absolutely crazy this is. I'm not going to explain the plot to you because it's literally so complicated, but it's literally like somebody went to go see the musical, took a load of meth afterwards, and then tried to write a fanfic version of what they saw, with a lot of morally questionable content. But anyway, we are going to be focusing on the musical, so that's irrelevant. And that being said, let's get into the video. Starting off with our main gal, because we love a main character. Elphaba, I would say, comes across as brave, but also quite misunderstood. She's been an outsider her whole life, so she's quite introverted and she keeps to herself. But this is mostly because other people have avoided her because she's green and just looks a bit weird. She's also highly opinionated and very much believes in an equal society amongst all, and is also very much against a corrupt government rule, as you know, a normal person should be. That being said, the first book I have is a wild one, but hear me out, and that's Animal Farm by George Orwell. This novel is a political allegory of a bunch of farm animals who revolt against their human farmer, in an aim to create an equal society where all the animals are free, happy, and equal. However, the power ends up corrupting the pigs and they end up becoming tyrants. And this story ultimately critiques the Russian Revolution and the rise of the Soviet Union, especially warning against totalitarianism and the abuse of power. I feel as though Elphaba would very much love this book on its critique on power and corruption. As we know, the wizard in Oz is a little bit of a corrupt tyrant himself, and Elphaba has a strong sense of justice and opposition against this corrupt government rule. There's also very heavy themes of rebellion and resistance, and I think this very much mirrors Elphaba's own determination in fighting against the mistreatment of other animals, like they're literally animals. And this very much aligns with the initial rebellion on the animal farm in order to overthrow the human to create an equal society. I just think this book actually has so many parallels with Wicked, and I genuinely think that Elphaba would love this. In a similar vein of resistance against government corruption, I feel like Elphaba would really love The Hunger Games by Suzanne. This is a dystopian novel set in a nation comprising of a very wealthy, corrupt capital and several oppressed districts. And each year, as a punishment for a previous rebellion, the capital forces 2 kids from each district to participate in a televised fight to the death, famously called The Hunger Games. And the novel follows a girl who participates and fights in these games and ultimately becomes the resistance against them. As mentioned, I feel like Elphaba would absolutely love the themes of resistance against oppression in this book. The Emerald City and the capital from The Hunger Games just have so many parallels in my eyes. They're both very central cities with a lot of wealth, and they have a very corrupt ruler. And Elphaba also comes from like a poor area in the same way that Katniss Everdeen comes from District 12. And I feel like she would very much see the capital's oppressive regime mirror her own rebellion against authority in Oz. I also just think she'd adore Katniss with her ability to empathize as an underdog, and ultimately being a frontrunner in the resistance to overthrow a morally corrupt tyrant. And for my third book for Elphaba, I think she would heavily relate to Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This classic novel revolves around a scientist who, in a scientific experiment, creates a very horrific sentient creature. However, this creature is craving to find acceptance and understanding after being shunned from society, because they face constant rejection and isolation, and it essentially leads him to take revenge against his creator. I think that Elphaba would not only be able to relate to this character for everyone else around them being freaked out by their green skin, but I think she'll very much see herself in being an outsider and also just being isolated by everyone around her. For example, her father has always much preferred her sister, and initially Glinda and her other friends just steered clear of her. So she's no stranger to this outsider perspective that the monster has too. The book Frankenstein also has a lot of commentary on what is good and evil, which really mirrors a lot of the commentary on being wicked that Elphaba has. She's also misjudged into being a villain purely just based on her appearance and her defiance. So I think she'll very much see herself in this character and definitely rate this book 5 stars. Moving on to our next character, we have Glinda the Good Witch. Whilst in the musical, she kind of comes across as like one-dimensional and a little bit ditzy, I would argue that she is very creative, ambitious, and optimistic. She has big character development throughout the story, which I personally think she's very reflective and adaptable. For me as well, she comes across as very warm and loyal because she becomes very supportive of elphaba. I mean, she's literally best friends with her at one point. Therefore, on the theme of friendship, I think the first book that Glinda would really like is My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. This novel is set in a poor but vibrant neighborhood in Naples, Italy, and we follow the intense friendship and also rivalry between two girls from childhood to adulthood. The book explores the complexities in female friendships as well as the impact of social and economic changes on the country. I feel like Glinda relates to this book because the relationship between the girls is a very complex female friendship, and I'm sure she'd see herself and elphaba reflected in these two characters. There's competition and jealousy, but also so much compassion and love between them, and these deep bonds are tested by both personal and social challenges. Also, as Glinda herself goes on quite a personal development arc, I feel like she'll very much relate to the themes of transformation and self-discovery in the book, because the two girls in My Brilliant Friend are very much trying to navigate the constraints of their environment, and they're striving to grow into identities that go beyond the confines of their upbringing, which I feel like is very much like Glinda trying to become a different person than what her sheltered upbringing initially allowed. And speaking of sheltered upbringings, this brings me on to my next book, which I think she'd like, which is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. This classic novel set in 19th century England follows a young woman navigating her complex feelings for a wealthy and aloof man, where his initial pride and her prejudices against them evolve into mutual respect and love. This book is thick with themes of societal expectations on women and the importance of personal growth. Starting with the obvious, there's a lot of character development in this book as the main character overcomes her prejudices in being judgmental towards others, which I think is so reflective of Glinda initially in being judgmental towards elphaba before seeing who she really is. In the book, there's also a lot of commentary about class dynamics and social etiquette that I think Glinda would very much enjoy. She herself is from high society, and I feel as though she would very much see this superficiality in society in Oz very much reflected in the book. Lastly, I feel like Glinda is a hopeless romantic, and she would very much dig the romantic tensions going on here, at least I did. Plus, I also think there's parallels between Fiyero and Mr. Darcy, and also with Bok being like the weird cousin that like pines after her. It just really made me laugh, and I think it would make Glinda laugh too, so yeah, I think she'd like this book. And speaking of romantic tension, another book I think she'd really like is The Viscount Who Loved Me by Julia Quinn. In case you missed the joke here, the main character from the Bridgerton TV show adaptation also plays Glinda's love interest Fiyero in the upcoming film. But even that aside, I actually think she'd really love the book. The novel, also set in 19th century England, follows the eldest sibling of a very wealthy family who is set to marry. He has his sights on a girl, but first he must get approval from the older sister, who is quite thorny to say the least. And whilst they get off on the wrong foot with some unbelievable tension, it ultimately blooms into undeniable attraction. Apart from the similar reasons of romantic tension and social etiquette in Pride and Prejudice that I think she'd like, I think she would also see herself in the main characters in terms of fighting between themes of duty and personal happiness. I reckon Glinda constantly finds herself torn between familial obligation due to her high place in society, as well as just picking what makes her happy, which is very much the conflict in the Bridgerton book too, and I feel like she would just very heavily relate to these characters. Speaking of Fiyero, we obviously have to have a look at what books he'd like next. Fiyero's a funny one because he honestly comes across as such a himbo in the musical. He's quite a schmoozer, he's very charming to the ladies, and he's also quite vain because he just knows he's pretty. He's also very adventurous though, and he's not afraid to go against the norm. But because he comes across as like quite ditzy, it generally wouldn't surprise me if his favourite book was like The Very Hungry Caterpillar or something, but I promise I'll give him more respect in this video. So the first book I actually think he'd quite like is Time Code of a Face by Ruth Ozeki. So this book is literally about a woman who just stares at her face in a mirror for 3 hours and basically writes down her thought processes whilst doing so she explores a range of notions, including her ethnicity, her relationship with religion, and the concept of aging, and that's just to name a few. Maybe this choice is a little bit too on the nose, but I feel like Fiyero would very much love the idea of looking at himself in the mirror for 3 hours. I did say I was going to give him more respect. The book is very much about self-reflection and identity beneath the surface. And whilst Fiyero may seem shallow and carefree when it comes to looks and beauty, I think he would very much resonate with the author here in looking beyond what's on the surface level to uncover the authentic version of people. Because in Wicked, he very much goes against societal definitions of what is deemed worthy of beautiful in Oz. The book also has a lot of commentary on the introspective examination of oneself, and I think Fiyero would relate to this. Maybe at one point he was more superficial in just looking at his image, but I think throughout the story of Wicked he becomes more critical of people's appearances on the surfaces and learns about their true character. Like, yes, he loves how he looks on other beautiful people around him, but he can also be aware of that. Speaking of loving appearances, I also think he would very much like A Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This is a classical philosophical novel that follows a man in Victorian England, and whilst having his portrait painted, he has a wish that he would remain forever young and beautiful like his portrait, and surprise, the wish comes true. However, throughout the book, he very much indulges in sin and hedonism, and his morally bad choices are then reflected in his painting, and therefore this portrait becomes uglier and uglier to reflect these bad choices. And the book ultimately shows the dark side of living a life that is solely devoted to pleasure. Starting with the most obvious, I feel like Fiyero would see himself in the main character in placing a lot of emphasis on youth and beauty. Fiyero values how he looks, and also at the start of Wicked, he values how others look, and this dominates a lot of the interactions he has. However, I also feel as though Fiyero very much relates to this concept of dual identities that himself and Dorian Gray has. Dorian Gray, I feel like, is very much split in the middle of one side living very free and indulgently and doing whatever he wants, but also has this guilt on the other side, knowing that his portrait is deteriorating rapidly from these choices. And I feel like Fiyero also has this dual identity. He knows he's very confident and charming in his public persona, whereas he probably relates to his private self a little bit more. He's very complex, and he's also very adventurous and ambitious. So I think he would very much like this book, because even though he'd relate to the character at the start in terms of vanity, he would also see himself at the end in realizing that not everything is just about looks. Moving on to the next young male in Wicked, we have Bock. And if you can't tell from my tone, I'm just not as much of a fan of him. Maybe that's because reading the book made me realize how much of a weirdo he is, but alas, we're going to be sticking to the musical. Whilst Bock does have a kind heart and he's very hardworking and loyal, he can be very naive to the action of others around him. For example, his infatuation with Glinda just shows this certain innocence he has. And he's generally just a socially awkward person. He often finds himself uncomfortable in social situations and expressing feelings. Therefore, what better book about a naive boy who is socially awkward than The Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky. This is a coming-of-age novel that revolves around a introspective and sensitive teenage boy, and we follow him navigate his relationships with his family and friends during his freshman year in high school. The novel has themes of adolescence, family, friends, mental health, and the impact of trauma. I think Bock would adore this book in its relatability of adolescent struggles and uncertainties. Both characters seem to have a hard time in navigating young love, friendship, and searching for their own identity. Following on from this, I feel like both characters also very much strive for social acceptance amongst others. They're both socially awkward and see themselves as outsiders, and they both yearn for someone to understand them, which means they also place a lot of value on friendships and just the transformative power that this has over them. And for both characters, having this circle of friends is really a source of support and growth for them, along with helping them with their life's challenges. Another book I think that Bock would go absolutely feral for is White Nights by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This novel follows a lonely and introverted man wander through the streets of St. Petersburg at night. His life then takes a drastic turn when he meets another young woman and she's waiting for her lover to return. But after 4 nights, they develop a very intense and deep connection after they share their emotions and deepest desires and fears. However, it's not meant to be between them, and this story is ultimately one of yearning and unrequited love. And if there's anyone that knows anything about those two things, it's Bock. Bock deals with Glinda's unrequited love throughout Wicked, and he just has this intensity for connection, especially in relation to a girl, which said girl is then interested in another guy, which is absolutely identical in this book. Bock and this main character are also just like really intense people who love to yearn. Like, it generally would not surprise me if they're like Pisces or Cancers or something. And that's coming from a Pisces myself, so no hate. The main character in White Nights is just also someone who's lonely in solitude and just yearning for companionship, which I think Bock would just very much see himself himself in and therefore really love the book. And last but not least, how could we forget the last character, the ruler of Oz, the wizard? For me personally, he comes across as very insecure and power hungry and yearns for this control over other people, and he therefore ends up being quite manipulative and cunning in order to have his way. I therefore think you would absolutely love The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. You may think I'm joking because I'm laughing, but I am actually very serious about this one. This is a self-help book where the author examines historical figures and classical texts and ultimately creates 48 powers of law that allows someone to navigate and gain power in various areas of their life, including personal relationships and work. And whilst it does offer pragmatic guidance in power dynamics, it also has a lot of techniques in manipulation and strategic play. I think that The Wizard would give this 5 stars on Goodreads, no doubt. The Wizard has got to this corrupted high position for a reason, and he has most likely used techniques in manipulation. And he'd definitely love this book because I'm sure it will just give him more techniques in gaining power and control over other people. Plus, reading the book Wicked actually made me realize just how much of a morally bad guy he is, and he just seems very cunning and sly, and I think that he would genuinely love this book. In a similar vein, I think he would also very much love How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. This book is also a self-help guide, but it's like a nicer, softer version of the previous book. It focuses on how someone can develop their interpersonal skills and communication, and it shows the importance of human connection and nature and making other people feel understood. And the purpose is to build genuine and positive relationships with people and influencing others in a beneficial manner to gain their respect. I feel as though if the wizard wanted to be a nicer person and have more respectful influence, he would like this book. Because the book is about mastering the art of persuasion over people rather than being outright manipulative. And it also shows how to maintain power over people through positive relationships. I feel as though the reformed wizard at the end of the Wizard of Oz film would probably relate more to this book than the previous one. I mean, the wizard is also quite a charismatic person, so I think he'd like this book in encouraging that trait in his personality. And yeah, I genuinely believe he would think that this book slaps. And there you have it, team. That is officially Wicked's TBR list. I hope you enjoyed this video. Oh my god, this was so fun to make. Creating this video has actually made me so excited for the film, and I cannot wait to see it. And yes, I will be crying when Defying Gravity comes on. And what about it? If you did like this video, please drop a like down below. It really helps my channel out and other people can see me recommend weird and niche books. And if you're new, please feel free to subscribe. I make new videos every single Tuesday yapping about books. Feel free to follow me on Goodreads when I update what books I'm reading in real time, and also feel free to follow me on my Instagram. I post more personal stuff on there, but I also post about books as soon as I finish reading them, so you can see what I've rated them and also what they're about. And once again, thank you so much for watching and being here and just supporting me. It really means so much to me. I love you, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!